It is an uncomfortable situation to talk about, and the main thing that I want people to know is that nobody's blaming particular people for anything. They're just asking that you recognize that you're still benefiting from things that happened 200 years ago that should have changed already. So it's not calling out necessarily. That's the focus of Wenatchi Wear, is to bring people together, that people can represent and just share and be proud of where we are. We're in Wenatchi. It's named after the tribes. And I think modernization and colonization, a lot of that has happened over the years. And, the Wenatchi Tribe spent many, many years, thousands of years along here and along the river and up along the icicle. And right now, as we know, the little Bavarian village is not really known for having that rich Native American culture. But I think it just takes people to step up and step out and talk about it.
There's no changing history, what happened. But we can change that meaning. We can change the narrative, as they would say. It's not going to hurt you. It's painless. But let's right some of these wrongs. Let's correct the history. Correct the meaning of that history. Let's own the genesis of why these people were eliminated. We're not a different species. We're human beings. We have the same basic needs. We have the same basic wants. But the one thing that's been painfully removed is a people's ability to decide their future. It's the political powerlessness that Native people have been subjected to. It's when a people's history, a people's culture has been invalidated, that they cannot feel proud of who they are, starting as children. That conspires in your ability to make very solid and healthy decisions for your future, if you're even given that ability to decide your future. What's wrong with guilt? People should feel guilty. There's no changing history, what happened. But we can change that meaning.
Wenatchi people, or Piscosa, were a group of Native Americans originally living in the region near the confluence of the Columbia and Wenatchi rivers. Their history gets complicated around 1855, when there was confusion surrounding the Yakima Treaty. The treaty was supposed to establish the Wenatchi Reservation and fishing locations, but the federal government never recognized the boundaries of the agreement. The Wenatchi were encouraged to move to the Moses Columbia Reservation, but most filed for homesteads while waiting for their promised reservation to be formalized. Many were eventually forced to the Colville Reservation after being forced out by white settlers. Wenatchi Chief John Harmelt refused to sell the Wenatchi rights to a reservation and remained in the Wenatchi area until his tragic death in 1937. On this episode of the NCWLIFE Magazine, we're learning more about local Native American history, as well as a new Wenatchi company looking to help share historic Wenatchi Native culture and storytelling through a line of art and apparel. We'll be right back.
My name is Randy Lewis. Doesn't sound like a native name, but my Indian name is Kayachan. And it's a lot easier to say Randy Lewis than for somebody to be messing up my name. Kayachan. Icha incha Kayachan. Here is me, Randy. My roots are both Wenatchi and Methow, or Methow and Wenatchi, and with admixtures of German, Entiat, Chelan, Moses Columbia, all of the, what we say, Nahamchin speaking tribes here.
Randy Lewis's roots run deep in the Wenatchi Valley, with his great-great-grandfather establishing the Miller-Freer Trading Post, which became the cornerstone of Wenatchi. Born on the reservation, his family moved several times in his early days.
Shortly after I was born, we moved from there. My mother was very, she was a go-getter. She would do anything to take care of her children. And my older brother and my mother and I, we left there and we moved back down to our ranch in Aswell, just south of Pateros. And we were there for about a year, then moved down to Ellensburg, then to Celilo. My grandfolks still pursued the annual salmon fishing migration, so we lived at Celilo Falls, which was the largest salmon fishery in the world at that time, on the Washington-Oregon border. So I grew up with the smell of the wild river and salmon. We were there until 1955. In 1955, they had started the construction of the Dalles Dam, and they relocated everyone. And so we returned and came here to Wenatchi. Wenatchi was our roots, my grandfather's roots.
In the late 1700s, Lewis says there was a strong population of natives in the Wenatchi Valley that began to face an epidemic. As whites began to settle in the area, smallpox and other epidemics reduced population numbers for the Wenatchi Tribe in 1780.
At one time, the Wenatchi people, we say Npascosa, the Pascosa people, they were in the thousands. There was 25 villages going up to Lake Wenatchi. And at the end of the 1700s, the first major epidemics came through, literally obliterating the population here. And even after that, there was still a strong resident population. Rock Island itself was an incredible rendezvous point, as was the confluence of the Wenatchi and the Columbia, which is just upriver from Rock Island. These were major gathering and trading areas.
From Rock Island to Stemilk Creek and Squilchuck, Lewis says they all had villages between 800 and 2,000 at the mouth of each creek with slight dialects. It was up until the 1920s until the construction of the Rock Island Dam began, where Lewis's family would return to the area of Rock Island for salmon fishing despite being barred from their fishing rights.
My grandfather would never acknowledge the white dominion over them, I guess you could say. And he would never give up his fishing rights. Cabinet Rapids, Rock Island, up the Tumwater, the Icicle. He fished all those. And even as a kid, my brother and I would go with him, or brothers and my cousins. And I think just to push the envelope, he would spear salmon right out of the fish ladders, gaffing them out. And we'd run them up to my grandma, and she would properly take care of them. And it challenged he was arrested. He was taken up to Waterville or here in Wenatchi, and he would never relent.
The history of the Wenatchi Tribe is a complicated one, wrapped in deceit and pain as they were driven from one area to another, negotiating failed federal agreements and ultimately spending lifetimes fighting for a lost reservation. Lewis says he feels the history isn't one often acknowledged in the local Wenatchi community.
A lot of people have forgotten because there's been no connection for 100 years or more, actually going back to 1880 as they were being expelled from here. Once a generation is removed, let alone 2, 3, 4 generations, that history becomes, less and less. You lose more and more of it. No one wants to feel guilty, but the fact is that you become the beneficiaries of a stolen legacy, of a great crime. The Wenatchis were murdered, they were slaughtered. They were finally driven up to what was called the Moses Columbia Reservation, which extended from Canada to Chelan, and which wasn't their homeland. And I think there was resentment up there, especially in the Methow, of Chief Moses's people all of a sudden coming in and being granted allotments, homesteads. But they were only there for about 5 or 6 years, and then they were driven out again by the cavalry, who came in, and they had terminated their reservation because gold was found. So Indians had to go, and again they were forced to move, and they didn't know this was going on. They woke up with the cavalry there, pushing them out once again, and so much like the Palestinians feeling displaced in their own homeland. Once again, we were forced to move to make room for greater powers. And I don't think people want to know that history. They don't want to admit it, that they became the recipients of stolen land.
Lewis grew up on Wenatchi Heights, overlooking the Stemilt Pinnacles with his entire extended family. It was this upbringing that gave Lewis a childhood filled with creation stories and Native history.
Well, we didn't have electricity, we didn't have water at Celilo. Then when we moved to the Wenatchi Heights, our first house up there didn't have either of those. And so you didn't have extraneous radio, television, that didn't exist. So what you heard was this rich history. We absorbed a lot. I'm not certain whether they were telling these stories for us to hear or as a continual reinforcement of their own world, of their own culture. Because they had really seen going from the horse and the canoe days to the jet age, which is just incredible, and gone from a totally Indian-speaking world to an English-speaking world. I really commend Mary Big Bull Lewis for her work she's been doing, putting together this business in an area that has not been that, how would you say it, supportive of Native people. She's building bridges. She's building bridges out there for understanding, opening those doors little by little, increment by increment.
It was these stories and tales that helped cement Lewis's connection with his culture, and it's this connection that Mary Big Bull Lewis is sharing with today's Wenatchee Valley. Up next, a look inside Wenatchee Wear, a local company celebrating Native culture and connection with the Wenatchee Valley.
My name's Mary Big Bull Lewis. I'm an enrolled member of the Colville Confederated Tribes from the Wenatchee, Moses, and Eniat bands, as well as a descendant from the Blackfoot tribe. I was born and raised here in Wenatchee. My grandma, who is not my biological grandma, had a huge part of our upbringing. So we were not raised traditionally, per se. So my parents decided to keep us here locally. My dad's family is there's 11 total siblings that are, the reservation is the Blackfoot tribe in Brockett, Alberta, Canada, and that's about 12 hours away. So we would visit quite a bit.
Inspired by her family history and culture, Mary and her husband Rob started Wenatchee Wear in 2019. The goal? Creating awareness and empowering Indigenous communities through authentic threads and design with purpose. Bringing their years of experience in art and graphic design with their other company, Our Digital Design, Mary and Rob are bringing local stories to life.
Meaning that each of our designs has a story primarily focused on local Native American tribes to help educate and share just Indigenous history. I would say about 6 years ago or so, I started to dive a little bit more into Native American history and trying to learn that aspect, and started participating in some traditional things like the sweat lodge and learning different languages, getting the language CDs from them. So I'm trying to learn that myself and teach it to my son as well. That way he has something that he can be proud of to represent. It just felt right. It's a feeling that's really hard to explain to somebody, but it was definitely the missing piece that I hadn't had in my life for quite a long time. So now I've been able to make great connections with local historians and other Wenatchee tribal members that are here, as well as some of the Wenatchee Advisory Board, which consists of Wenatchee tribal members.
Wenatchee Wear's main goal is education, acknowledgement, and advocating for a piece of local land to be dedicated to the tribe as a cultural gathering space.
Just talking with people, and we still get it often, is that people ask if there are any Wenatchee tribal members still alive, that they think that we don't exist. So that's a little tough to hear, but also motivation to continue to educate people. what I would really like to do and what our designs are focusing on doing is just educating people on the history. It was back in 1855 when the treaties were not upheld by the government and that the Wenatchi Tribe actually lost their reservation that they were supposed to receive. And the Wenatchi Tribe's actually non-federally recognized tribe. That's why they're under the governance of the Colville, as well as the other 10 tribes that are within the Colville. You know, this venture to create awareness and to educate people about what happened is just kind of a stepping stone to get to where we want to be. The city has some great projects going on that we're collaborating with them to hopefully, my goal is to purchase land back or to either receive a donation of somebody that wants to give land back to the tribe because there's no local area or land that belongs to Wenatchi Tribe here. And so for them to practice traditional powwows or sweat lodges or just even getting together just to have a cultural event, there's no meeting place here whatsoever that's even dedicated to them. It's definitely something that's long overdue. It's been almost 200 years since the treaties were broken. So I think the main thing is just educating everybody.
When launching the clothing line, Mary and Rob prioritized creating pride for the Wenatchi community.
So we wanted to highlight significant features of the valley, things that have been here that are iconic pieces of history. So the first design that we kind of started with was Two Bears, which is a Wenatchi tribal tale. And it's about the two bears that would argue constantly and that they would just fight every day, and Coyote would warn them that they needed to get along. And eventually they wouldn't stop fighting, so Coyote turned them to stone. So they're forever seen squaring off over the valley. The original name of the rock was Squaw Saddle, which is derogatory towards Native American women. And that's on government maps from back in the mining days. And over the last, I'd say 2 to 3 years, Bill Lehman was a significant part of renaming it officially. So he got it approved through the state level and then went to the federal level to get those changed. So I believe now it's actually called Saddle Gap. I wish they would have named it Two Bears, but yeah.
Another design that caught a little controversy is the Skookum Design. A local icon easily spotted above the Office Depot off Wenatchee Avenue, Wenatchee Wear has a line of apparel inspired by the landmark.
People can see it as derogatory, but our focus is to share the actual history of it because it is an iconic piece of history here in the Wenatchee Valley. It's been here for over 100 years. Lots of people remember when they were kids, they would drive by and wait for it to wink. And
we were drawn by the image of Skookum, the Indian Skookum, with these eyes going this way. We didn't find him offensive. Matter of fact, there was so little of us. There was so little representation of Native Americans, of Wenatchees, of American Indians, anywhere, that for us, that was, we aren't dead. It really tears at you as a kid that you come from such an evil history. And my granddad, he just kind of, no, it's not how it was. So when we saw Skookum with his smile, his happy face, we would always run down there and, come on, take our picture, take our picture. So they would take our picture with it.
So when we recreated it, I wanted it to be obviously our own design and wanted to make it more feminine. So I softened the lines, I gave her eyelashes, I gave her actual braids. So we did a lot of different things with it, but it's still the iconic piece. So the piece was actually inspired by a non-Native woman in the early 1900s that created little dolls that looked like Native Americans. So she was inspired by the culture. So she'd make these little dolls for kids to play with. And then in 1917, the fruit packaging company wanted to create a brand to kind of stand out amongst everybody else. And so it was actually an artist in the South that came up with the little Indian boy. And they had like a totem pole and a couple other, pretty generic, typical Native American art. And they decided to just keep the little Indian boy. And so that was made into their packaging to sell, and they still do use it. It's been sold through several different companies. And the actual word Skookum is Chinook jargon. So it's kind of a mishmash of several different things, but to me, I don't find it offensive, but to each their own, and I'm definitely don't try and force it on anybody. And if, the people that do love it, they see it as a positive, and that I have a lot of people asking, like, how should I feel about that? And I don't tell them how they should feel. I just explain the story to them and leave it up to them. That way they can decide. And it's very inspiring to see people's reactions to this. Because when we launched, I had no idea how it was going to be received. It could have been totally negative or positive, and I didn't know how it was going to be taken. But we've gotten nothing but positive feedback, and people are very thankful for what we're doing because they respect the land and that they want to see change happen. So that's just been very humbling to be a part of that.
From hand-drawing designs to screen printing each piece locally in Chelan, Wenatchi Wear strives to continue to share the history of the Wenatchi Tribe and the geological landmarks that surround us all in the Wenatchi community. You can find Wenatchi Wear products online at wenatchiwear.com or at Mulberry Manor in downtown Wenatchee. Randy Lewis says Mary and Rob's modern spin on Native American art is a way of healing what's known as the sacred hoop.
Native people have always saw everything as a circle, the circle of life, the seasonal change. You call it we call it some people call it the circle of life, others call it the medicine wheel, the sacred hoop. Well, since the coming of Westerners, that hoop, little by little, it has been broken, it has been dismembered, piece taken out from residential school. Diseases and Jesus, as we say. Those all factored into the destruction of the sacred hoop. It's been dismembered. But over the years, we've come together and we sit and we talk and we share. We remember lessons and history of the past. And as my mom would say, and it heals us. It heals our people to remember. And if you think about it, what is the opposite of dismember? Remembering. We're remembering that hoop. We're bringing it back together. We're putting back together those pieces.
I wanted to tag out this episode with a quick note. Local students have worked with Randy Lewis on creating and sharing the stories of the Wenatchi Tribe, releasing The Winter's Tale with the Icicle Creek Center for the Arts. Here's a captivating trailer of that production.
When I was a kid, we didn't have electricity, we didn't have running water, but what we had was a wealth of stories. And every night, my grandmother and grandpa would start out by saying, "We don't have a lot to give you. I come to you with empty hands." Icha and cha. Kashlachan, he'd say. "Here is me, Kashlachan, your grandfather. I give you these things." The area we're at right now, we call it Nakwekweas. Means when the Creator threw rocks out everywhere and they landed.
The geology, if we're just a few thousand, or let's say less than 20,000 years in time, is the absolute perfect marriage between Native American stories and our scientific work.
Not far from here, below the confluence in the Columbia River, there existed a being. He was a carryover from the time before people. We had a name for him, Specksman. Specksman was a river dragon, and he was the last of his kind. Man had no power, he had no spirit, he had no magic. We all have superheroes now. Well, these were our superheroes 13,000 years ago.
For more information on that film, visit icicle.org/winterstale. I'm producer Caitlin Hedersheet. Thanks for watching.